Hey everyone, welcome to Humanifesto, the podcast where we explore how those of us with ADHD can live more authentically and in alignment with our values and goals. I'm your host, Matt Jones, and it's great to have you here today. In this episode, we're going to break down the top challenges that get in the way of living authentically with ADHD. Things like people-pleasing, impulsivity, and emotional dysregulation. We're going to dig into real-life stories, research-backed insights, and practical tools that you can start using today. In a world designed for brains that are wired differently to ours, it can be difficult to show up as our true selves, and at times it can be painful when we do. I'm not going to tell you it's easy, but it is simple and it is possible. So as you listen, I'd love to hear what resonates. Tag me on socials or email me your thoughts, and let's keep the conversation going. So get yourself comfortable and let's dive into this week's episode. It's called, What Are You So Afraid Of? So, let me know if this sounds familiar. I'm sitting on my sofa, I'm deep in depression, again, and for me, it always sneaks up quietly. I never see it coming. One day I'm fine, the next I feel numb, empty, lost. And on this particular day, I was watching Peter Kay videos on YouTube to try and cheer myself up, and he was telling this joke about texting and how we all keep checking our phones hoping someone's messaged us. It goes something like, you ever get that thing where you're waiting on a text, hoping it's someone important, maybe a friend or a date or whatever, and your phone buzzes and you think, here we go? And it's just Vodafone going, great new offers, unlimited text for £5 a month. And he's like, oh, balls to your offers. I don't want offers. I want mates. Now, at first I laughed, but then I froze. I picked up my own phone and I checked it. Texts, WhatsApp, socials, and other than a couple of messages from my wife and my parents, nothing. No messages, no calls for over 2 weeks. And that's when it hit me. At that point in my life, I didn't actually have any real friends. I used to, or at least I thought I did, but slowly, gradually over time, they faded from my life. Sure, I had mates I could go out and get drunk with sometimes, but no one I shared anything real with. No one who reached out to see how I was doing. No one who took the first step to contact me if I didn't take that step to contact them. And when we did hang out, they'd all be joking about stuff they'd done or been texting each other about in some group chat or whatever. But it was stuff that I hadn't seen, stuff I wasn't a part of. And don't even get me started on social media. For so long, I'd had these so-called friends telling me that they were busy or hadn't had time to respond or whatever. Yet, I go on social media, and plain as day, there's pictures of trips, parties, nights in, nights out, all without me. And I started asking myself, why? Why am I always on the outside? Why can't I seem to connect with people? I like to think I'm a good person. I like to think I'm a good friend. And look, as a side note, I get it. With ADHD, I realize I'm not the best with this stuff. I'm not great at responding quickly or missing messages or whatever. And I know that there's lots of people with ADHD who can probably relate as well. Scenarios like thinking you've replied to a message only to realize later that you hadn't. Or realizing you haven't responded for a while and now it's way too uncomfortable to do so because given how long it's been, what are they going to think? Weeks have gone by before you've actually responded. Or sometimes, what about this? Going the complete other way and bombarding people with messages over a short space of time, or oversharing to fill the void of the real or perceived lack of connection that's created. And then, one day a bit more recently, I saw this video on Instagram and it kind of answered everything, or maybe it didn't answer everything, but it did put everything into a sharp focus for me. So, it's somebody with ADHD, and they're talking about how they had different personalities for every person in their life. They were slightly different when they were with their partner, or with their parents, or with their friends, or their colleagues. Never truly 100% themselves, always adapting, like some sort of social chameleon. And look, while that sounds like a skill, It's not something that we ADHDers practice, right? It's something that we're sort of forced into. The constant criticism and judgment when we don't conform to stereotypical, neurotypical norms. It actually forces us to adapt, not to be authentic, but to fit in, to feel accepted, or to feel, dare I say, normal. And that was me too. Always performing, always acting, always masking, always on, always being who I thought people wanted me to be. Terrified on the inside that if I was just me, I'd be rejected again. And suddenly I knew why I couldn't form real connections. Because think about it. How can you build real friendships if you're not being real? How is people supposed to get to know you or to like you or to want to be a friend of yours if they don't really know who you are? So watching this video, it kind of shifted something in my mind. Okay. Let's not over exaggerate and say it changed everything. But whilst it didn't instantly transform my life, it did instantly start to impact my mindset. And as a result, I started on a new path. And for transparency, it's one I'm still on, but it's a path to being more real. And on the path, I discovered something interesting. I'd spent years trying to find the add-ons, right? The upgrades, the expansion packs to my personality so I could finally be the person I wanted to be. But in truth, what I'm realizing is that finding your way to being your authentic self is rarely about adding things. It's more about taking things away, right? Losing things that were never truly you in the first place. And that, my friends, is why I was struggling to feel like I belonged anyway. And it was also why I was exhausted all the time, depressed, isolated, because I was unknowingly creating all these avatars to fit each situation and relationship. And I'm sure, as lots of you are probably realizing yourselves, keeping up all those masks is not only exhausting, but it's unsustainable. So tell me if this also sounds familiar. Right, picture yourself. You're in a conversation or some sort of social situation or work setting. People are all talking in a group, and then you chip in with something, and everyone just stops. They all turn and look at you like you've got two heads. And even if you can't put your finger on what's happened there and then in the moment, you realize that your contribution was somehow inappropriate for the situation. In reality, what you're experiencing in those moments is you picking the wrong version of yourself for the scenario. Not because you're a bad person, or because you're stupid, or because you lack social skills, but because you've got so many versions of you bouncing around in your head, it's impossible to keep track and shapeshift perfectly on demand. When we're tired, when we're stressed, or when we're uncomfortable, we go into fight or flight mode, and our brains are flooded with adrenaline and cortisol. Now, the cortisol is super uncomfortable, and we're desperate for an escape, as well as the fact that cortisol inhibits our neocortex functioning. So, the areas of our brain that deal with things like language, logic, pattern recognition, problem solving, and so on, they all go offline in the moment and they're unavailable to you. And then you've got the adrenaline pushing you to act immediately to escape the uncomfortable situation. And when you couple that with our impulsive nature as ADHDers, it's no surprise that we're going to inadvertently blurt out the first thing that comes to mind. So look, today I'm inviting you to start on a different path. One where you don't need to switch between these different versions of you, but one where you stay true to yourself regardless of the situation. Well, if only it was that easy, right? I mean, come on. But before we can step into a more authentic presentation of ourselves and to lose the protective armor of these various personas, it's helpful for us to figure out why we created them in the first place. And in most cases, it comes down to avoiding pain. Pain of rejection, pain of exclusion, pain of humiliation or embarrassment, pain of criticism, pain of judgment. The list goes on and on. And I'm sure you have a few of your own that you can add as well. But at the end of the day, pain is pain and avoidance is avoidance. Ironically, it also has lots of disguises, just like we do. So let's try and break down some of the reasons ADHD can make authenticity so difficult and how each of them link back to fear and pain avoidance. So I've got a list of 10. Like I said, the list is way longer than that, and I'm sure you've got plenty to add. So feel free to share through socials or email or whatever, and let me know and the community know ones that resonate or ring true for you. So I'll go through them one at a time. First one's a big one, people pleasing. So when you add people pleasing to impulsivity and emotional sensitivity, you're going to get approval seeking. Now, I don't know about you folks, but I used to agree to everything just to avoid disappointing people. And that's exhausting, right? There's no way that you can keep that up day to day, week to week without the wheels falling off. But really, people pleasing, when it comes down to it, it's about fearing rejection, criticism, and judgment. And the pain is pain of feeling like we're less than enough, not smart enough, not funny enough, not good looking enough, not clever enough, like whatever it may be. Now, the next one is impulsivity. So take impulsivity, i.e., acting fast without reflection. That is going to lead to some questionable decisions and likely some questionable results too. So I'll give you one that I'm sure is familiar to loads of you listening if you've got ADHD. How about if I buy this new notebook, this is going to fix everything, right? Shiny, shiny, new, new. But really, the impulsivity, that acting quickly, it's about fearing a loss of momentum. Now we're finally motivated. Okay, if you've got ADHD, you know that your motivation comes in peaks and troughs. It's the intraspace nervous system. Okay, so when we finally get to a point where we're motivated for something or we're slipping into a hyper focus for something, we don't want to lose that momentum. Losing that momentum is going to go back to procrastination and putting things off and going back to being unproductive, back in that trough as opposed to the peak. So really, the pain here is the pain of failing and not living up to our potential. Quick side note, how many of you have heard that from teachers, parents, and other people in your life? If only you did X more, if only you paid attention more, tried harder, etc., you're squandering your potential. So naturally, all of those messages from our childhood and growing up, they've stuck in our brains and they're painful. So when our brain is doing this to us, i.e., our brain is trying to get us to act quickly, it's to try and help us avoid experiencing that pain again. Now, number 3 on the list is emotional dysregulation. So when you've got a difficulty or a challenge in regulating your emotions, it's going to lead to big reactions, even from small triggers. So for me, I know that I spent so much time in my life bottling things up until eventually I couldn't keep it in anymore and then I'd explode and take it out on whoever was in front of me there and then. And then that's going to lead to spiraling with guilt and shame afterwards. So emotional dysregulation is linked to fearing not being understood or accepted. And the pain is of feeling isolated and alone. Number 4, difficulty prioritizing self-care. So when you have a difficulty in prioritizing self-care, usually due to the executive dysfunction that we have as a result of our ADHD, it makes it difficult for self-care. So I don't know about you guys, but I know there's been days where, particularly when I'm in a bad place or I'm in a low mood or I'm depressed or whatever, things like getting up and showering on a weekend, brushing my teeth, whatever, all those things just get put off because I just don't feel like I've got the energy or I've got the focus to do it. And not to mention burnout. Yeah, been there often. I don't know about you lot, but that's another common one for ADHDers. And prioritizing self-care is effectively a result of us fearing that nothing we do is ever going to be enough. And it's a fear of, or rather, the pain there is the pain of failure. Now, number 5, another big one. I'm sure this is familiar to most, if not all of you, but masking, right? Hiding traits to fit in. And doing that over time is going to lead to identity erosion. So all these masks that we've been talking about over the last episode and this one up to now, the masks that we take on and off depending on the situation, the fear here is that our true selves are somehow lacking or inadequate. And the pain is of not measuring up to expected standards placed upon us by society or by people in our lives. Number 6, Inconsistent self-identity plus constant adaptation equals losing touch with yourself. So by the time I was diagnosed at like 40, I'd masked so much and so often, I didn't even know who I was anymore. And this is really centered around a fear of being excluded and left behind, or just left. And the pain is the pain of being misunderstood or the pain of not being accepted for who we really are. And again, quick side note, thinking back to all of those additional criticisms and stuff that we experienced like in the first 18 years of our lives, again, just like with the others, this is our brain trying to protect us, right? If we've been judged for showing our true selves or for being authentic or for being who we really are, and we're judged or criticized, excluded, made fun of, or whatever, it's natural that the brain is going to try and find ways to avoid that happening in the future. Number 7 is poor self-regulation, and that's going to lead to reactivity distorting our choices. So think about things like reading tone into messages, feeling or acting like you've been attacked and then ghosting that person back. Double standard much? But poor self-regulation and this sort of reactivity is centered around fear of missing the opportune moment to act. And the pain is pain of missing out, either through inaction or taking the wrong action. And that's why oftentimes we feel more comfortable making and taking a quick decision as opposed to pausing, reflecting, and thinking things through first. Number 8, I've got perfectionism and the fear of failure, because they're going to lead to being paralyzed by the idea of not being good enough. And it's fear that all those criticisms and judgments were actually true, and the pain of having to accept that people were right all along and we were actually broken or there was something wrong with us. I'm sure all of you have had this experience in one way or another, right? Where at first, the judgments and the criticisms and so on about your nature or your traits of ADHD, you know in your heart that you're not lazy. You know that you're not somebody who doesn't care or somebody who doesn't try. Actually, you know that the complete opposite is true. You try so hard, you put in so much effort in order to try and meet the standards that you're presented with in life. But the reality is, at some point, certainly from my experience, I know I got to a point where I sort of thought to myself, well, look, let's be realistic here. If everybody in my life, from teachers to parents to family members to friends to work colleagues, etc., if everybody is telling me that I'm lazy or I don't try hard enough or I don't care enough, what, logically speaking, what's more likely to be true? That everybody is wrong and I'm the only one that's right? Or I'm wrong and everybody else is right? And then we start to internalize this stuff. So over time, that then leads to this perfectionism and fear of failure. And another thing this leads to, number 9, negative self-talk. Now, I know your head is like mine on the inside. Our inner critic is loud and it's relentless. But let's not lose sight of the fact that this is another protection mechanism. Our inner voice is trying to shield us from the pain here. Okay? It's fear that if we act authentically, the world's going to come crashing down around us and we won't be able to cope or handle it. And fearing failure as ourselves, so we avoid trying to protect ourselves from the crushing pain of having to accept that actually it's true. And like I say, it isn't, by the way, but it feels that way. And then number 10, weak boundaries leads to approval seeking because seeking approval trumps self-respect. Now, I thought for a long time, if I let people do what they wanted and I did the things they wanted, they would like me more. And I realized that that just wasn't the case at all. All that led to was me getting taken advantage of, walked over, and just experiencing more negativity, the very negativity that I was trying to avoid. And when we struggle with maintaining or implementing boundaries, the fear with this one is that people are going to reject or leave us if we stay true to ourselves. And the pain is of being rejected as our authentic selves. So, quick question for you here. Which of these hit home for you? Is there one example that you've lived or one that you experience on a regular basis? Feel free to let us know. We'd love to hear from you. Share it with the community. Let other people know too. Now, quick side note here. If this action sort of resonated with you, or this section resonated with you, and you want to explore a little bit more and uncover and work on your fears, I highly recommend a book called Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway by Susan Jeffers. It's a fantastic book, only about 300 pages, so it doesn't take long to get through. But it's one of those books where you just start reading it and you just know instantly in your heart that what she's saying is right and what she's saying is true. And she talks about where these fears come from, how they manifest, and steps we can take to really pretty quickly start to work our way through them and come out the other side. And most importantly, what I got from that book was it didn't take the fears away and it didn't fix them, but what it did was it changed my relationship to fear. So rather than it being something that I try and avoid, it's something that more and more I'm able to lean into and try and understand where that fear is coming from, so I can then make a judgment call about what the next best action is to take. So what I want to do next is just zoom into a couple of the big ones in that list, okay? So we're going to look at a bit more detail around people pleasing and emotional dysregulation. So I'm going to start with people pleasing. So, show of hands, raise your hand if you've ever said yes to something that you didn't want to do. Yeah, me too. Look, for ADHDers, people pleasing is about survival. It's rooted in impulsivity, rejection sensitivity, and general low self worth. So, here's an example. Do you find that it's always you having to go to someone else's house rather than them come to yours? Or are you the one that always happily picks up extra shifts for other people, but they don't seem to reciprocate that when you need cover? Whatever it may be, I bet the same is true in terms of outcomes. Eventually, you start resenting them for it. Now, according to the research, executive dysfunction makes impulse control and boundary setting really hard for ADHDers because we're wired for rejection sensitivity. We are hypersensitive to the nonverbals, the changes in tone of voice, facial expressions, and so on. And we've got such great pattern recognition that even when people are trying to hide their resentment, negativity, frustration, or whatever it may be, we can pick up on it, right? That's one of the things that we do best. And then we get stuck in this sort of limbo place where we know that they're pissed off with us. They're saying that they're not, but we know that isn't true. And then our brains are trying to figure out what the explanation for the situation is. And as I'm sure you know from your own experience, in the absence of evidence, our brains naturally go to worst case scenario, cue catastrophizing, rumination, and so on and so forth. So here's a question for you to think about. When was the last time you agreed to do something that you didn't want to do? What was it? How did it affect you? And most importantly, why did you agree to do it? Generally speaking, as human beings, when we do things, we do them because we perceive that or expect or anticipate that there's going to be some sort of benefit, some sort of positive payoff for us. So when you said yes to that thing, what were you hoping you were going to get from it? Then I want you to think about strategies. So over the next week, I want you to think about starting small, okay? Saying no to low stakes stuff and clarifying your own priorities. What's important to you? Now, if you're a journaler like me, you can journal your yes moments where you did say yes and didn't want to, and try and ask yourself what was going on underneath. Now, let's move to the next big one, emotional dysregulation. I mean, look, this one's tough, right? ADHD emotions are intense. And I know lots of us are comorbid with other conditions as well, which sometimes can amplify the intensity of these emotions or the difficulty of trying to identify these emotions, like alexithymia and so on. But the point being is, whilst they're intense, oftentimes they blindside us. So I'll give you an example. I was in a meeting at work once, and the context for this was that I was working in a learning and development role, and we've been trying to do some training, and managers weren't making people available. They were saying that everyone was too busy and we couldn't get enough people in the training room and so on. But this was training that the managers themselves had been requesting because they were seeing negative drops in performance metrics and so on. So this was something they were asking for, but they weren't doing their part at allowing people to be available to come along to the training. So I put a little presentation together, just showing some of the numbers around the metrics in department that were dropping and about the attendance rates we'd had, particularly the late last minute cancellations. So at times we had a trainer in the room and should have had maybe 15 to 20 people, and they had 3 people or 4 people. And all of this was taking a long time to get through. It was frustrating for the training team, frustrating for the people who wanted the training. So generally, if you haven't picked up on it, it was frustrating for most people. So I tried to deliver all the information, and the conversation got a little bit confrontational, a little bit heated at times. But I finished the meeting and I walked out feeling pretty proud of myself. I held it together. I hadn't lost my temper. Felt like I delivered the information well. And then my manager was walking back with me to our desk, and she said, "So, how was that for you?" And I was like, "Yeah, I mean, it was a bit of a challenging meeting, wasn't it? Like, I would have liked people to have been a bit more open to collaborating on how we solve the problem rather than just sort of seeing it as a problem for us to solve. But, it is what it is." And she said, "Yeah, but how do you think you were in the meeting?" And I said, "Well, I thought I held it together pretty well. I mean, if anything, at least I was calm." And in that moment, right, she turns at me and she looks at me with these big, wide eyes, and she just stops walking and she said, "Matt, I could describe how you were in that meeting with a lot of words, but calm would not be one of them." And the reality is, I had no idea. I thought I was presenting myself one way, but to everybody else, I was coming across completely differently. So my manager's talking about how I was defensive, how I was passive aggressive, how I was cold in the way that I was responding to people. And I didn't even know I was doing it. Now, at first, ironically, I got defensive with her too, right? Well, I had a point though, didn't I? Blah, blah, blah. And yeah, I understand that you have a point, but we still need to think about how we put the information across. And anyway, fast forward to a couple of days later, and I spent some time kind of reflecting on it. And by the way, I'm not trying to paint myself as some saint. It wasn't like I consciously went home and reflected, thinking, "Oh, how can I do this better?" Albeit that's sort of closer to my approach to this sort of stuff now. But this was a few years ago, and at the time, it was rumination, right? I was just thinking about this thing over and over. And after I'd been thinking about it for a few days, she was right. I was pissed off. I was ashamed. I was frustrated. And I was acting out. So, cue the spiral: guilt, self loathing, isolation. And ironically, as uncomfortable as that was, that started a little bit of a shift for me too, in that I started to be more open to feedback I got from other people, because what I realized in that moment was that because of all the criticisms that I felt were unjustified all the way through my life up to this point, particularly in childhood, like I mentioned earlier, right? Being told we're lazy because we leave things till the last minute, because we need that burst of sort of adrenaline and focus in order to concentrate on the work, or, use the impending deadline to help us. Or because people said that I didn't care enough because I was disorganized or I was scattered in the way that I seemed to plan my work or my schoolwork or the way that I do things. Because I had so many of those judgments that I just got to a point where I outright rejected, because in my heart I knew they weren't true, even though I didn't have an explanation for them. So what I realized was I had got to a point where I just rejected all feedback, whether it was constructive, whether it was justified, whether it was right. I'd got, or rather not got, I'd let myself get to a point where I just put no value on what anybody else had to say. I only thought about what I had to say or what I felt or how I perceived the situation. And what I realized from this example with my boss was that sometimes I'm wrong. And it's important for me to think about other people's perspectives and to take those on board. That's not to say that I need to act on them or accept them or agree with them, but I do need to be open to them. So another bit of research insight. Again, this probably won't come as a surprise to a lot of you, but we know that ADHD is linked to intense, fast-moving emotional states. What that means is often our behaviors don't match our self-image. And even sometimes our behaviors or our thoughts or our actions don't match the way we're feeling. So, as a way of sort of explaining this one, have you guys ever had an experience like this where perhaps maybe things are going really well for you, or you've achieved something, or whatever it may be, and you know that you should be feeling really good, but you don't? You feel flat, or you feel frustrated, or you feel negative. And then similarly, there could be times where things aren't going very well and you should be feeling frustrated or angry or whatever, but you don't. You just feel sort of neutral or you just feel sort of numb to it. So, this sort of incongruence between what we're thinking, how we're feeling, and how we behave is something that can be quite challenging for people with ADHD. So, something for you to think about and reflect on. When have your emotions ever led you to act out of character? So again, whether you journal or want to put notes in your phone or whatever it may be, or chat to somebody that you trust, see if you can find at least a few examples where you've acted in a certain way, likely you regretted it or questioned it later on, and upon reflection realized it was your emotions that was driving that behavior as opposed to thinking it through more clearly. And again, we got some strategies to use here. So mindfulness is a really, really good one for this. Now, I know things like meditation don't always come easily to those of us that have ADHD, particularly when we've got frantic minds or we're sort of high energy or whatever at the time. But by trying things like mindfulness, and it can be meditation, but it can also be things like mindful eating. It can be things like walking meditations. It can be guided meditations. It can be things like just sitting in a park and watching the world go by and just seeing what thoughts and emotions come up. But what I found really, really useful with this, and I've got to be honest, meditation is what helped me to get to this point. But by meditating, I always thought that the whole point of it was, think about these like martial arts movies and stuff you've seen, right? You've got the Buddhist monks sitting in a monastery on top of a mountain somewhere, just sitting peaceful and quiet for hours on end, not moving. And I thought it was that sort of stoic, serene mentality that was the goal. But actually, what I realized through meditation, and this was by trying lots of different types of meditations, right? So this was walking meditation was really good for me because it allows movement, and then you can just sort of allow your mind to think whatever it thinks. And as your mind starts to wander, instead of coming back to the breath like you would with a sitting meditation, you can come back to the pace that you're walking, and you can come back to your steps as a way of grounding you and bringing you back to center. But the point being is, what I realized is that it's not about trying to stop thoughts happening or trying to stop emotions happening and putting yourself in this sort of Zen neutral state. But actually, it's more about allowing thoughts and emotions to come and to not to not react or respond to them immediately. I heard this described really nicely, if a little bit over poetically perhaps, but I heard somebody describe it as, imagine your mind as being the sky and your different thoughts and emotions are like clouds, just allowing them to come and go without any judgment, without acting on them, just letting them pass through you. And I also found that guided meditation was really helpful for this too, because if I'm listening to somebody walk me through how to say body scan or when to focus on my breathing or what type of things to focus on in my meditation, it gives me a center, like a target to sort of hang on to, right? And it allows me to sort of sit with it for a bit longer. And the point is that what I got from it over time was that allowing these thoughts and emotions to come without doing anything about them, without judging them or acting upon them, it allowed me to build a muscle in so much as when emotions start to come now, more often, I'm again, transparency, I don't get this perfect, okay? So I'm not trying to profess that I do, but more and more often, I'm noticing that when emotions, particularly intense or challenging emotions come up, or challenging or intense thoughts, I'm able to take, even if it's just a second or two, to pause before I react. And by putting in that little bit of a pause, even if it's just a second or two, oftentimes that can be the difference between reacting and responding. And if you're wondering about the difference between those two, the way I would define that is that Reacting is just as you feel the thought, the emotion or the thought come in, it just comes out completely unfiltered. Whereas responding is being aware of the emotion or aware of the thought and then taking a moment to pause before you choose how you want to react. Because the reality is, sometimes reacting in anger or frustration is absolutely the appropriate response to a given situation. Okay? But not always. So things like mindfulness and meditation can really help with that. I would also say that there's lots of CBT exercises and activities you can use to reframe distorted thinking. So there's plenty of stuff you can Google or go on ChatGPT to find ones that work for you. As I mentioned on the first episode, I tend to use CBT more like a pick and mix as opposed to a sort of designated modality. But that's just because I don't feel like it's a perfect fit for me, not because I have any questions about or doubts about the efficacy of CBT. I know for some people it works beautifully well. And another strategy I can give you, and this is a particularly good one in relationships, okay? And not just in romantic relationships, but in friendships, in boss employee relationships, teacher student relationships, and so on. Sometimes it can be helpful to build some sort of signaling system. Okay, so I'll let you into one that I use with my wife. So she came along to one of my therapy sessions because we were struggling with communication, particularly when I was in a really emotional place. And what we knew already and we're talking about in this session was that a lot of times my wife is aware that my emotions are starting to go out of control before I'm aware of it. So what would happen is she would just call that out. What and question me, why are you getting frustrated? Why are you getting so angry over something so small? And just like when somebody tells you to calm down, right? It never actually makes you calm down. It's like throwing petrol on the fire. And these questions, even though they were meant with all the best of intentions, why are you getting so angry? It's her trying to ask me to open up, to share, to let her in. But I just took it as an attack. I took it as you shouldn't be angry and I'm judging you for being so. So that would just spiral and make things worse. So what we've done now is we've come up with a little communication system. So if my emotions are starting to run away with me and I haven't picked up on it, my wife will just say to me, Matt, you're bubbling. And when she says bubbling, I know what she means is my emotions are getting close to spilling over. And so that gives me a moment of pause and reflection. So maybe now's the time to pause the conversation and to come back and come back when I'd sort of had a chance to calm down or a chance to sort of center myself again. But at times, it goes the other way where I'm aware that my emotions are running away with me and Laura hasn't picked up on it. So I then just say to her, Laura, I'm starting to bubble. And then she knows that my emotions are starting to get difficult to control. And again, it gives both of us the opportunity to be able to decide what we do with this conversation. Is now the time to continue it? Should we pause it? Should we take a different approach to it? Or whatever it may be. All right. So I hope some of that's helpful. And what I want to do now is move on and talk about some of the things that we can do as we develop this awareness. So we're going to look at a little bit of personal growth and some actions that we can take. So, as I mentioned at the top of the show, doing this stuff isn't easy, but it is simple. Okay. And what I mean by that is easy is about effort, and simple is about how capable we are of actually doing something. So let me just give you a very quick analogy of what I mean by that. So getting fit, it's simple. We all know how we get fit. We could go to the gym, we could take up running, take up a team sport, whatever. There's loads of ways we could do it. So we all know how to get fit. But is it easy to get up every morning or every evening and go out when it's raining or whatever it may be, right? Staying consistent, being able to motivate ourselves isn't necessarily easy, even though the process is relatively simple and straightforward, if that makes sense. So the truth is, you can live more authentically, even with ADHD. Now, you may be different than a lot of other people or most people you know. And honestly, I hope you are. difference is good. Different is beautiful. It was a great quote that was attributed to Albert Einstein, where he said, if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it'll spend the rest of its life believing it's stupid. The truth is, everyone's a genius. So, what I want you to do this week is I want you to pick a challenge that you currently have with boundaries or barriers to being unapologetically you. Now, if you're feeling brave, you can pick your biggest challenge. But if not, you can start with something small and recognize that if you do that, when you're feeling vulnerable, exposed, or low energy, even picking the smallest challenge is, in fact, a massive step forward. And I'm inviting all of you to do that this week, and that's to take one small step. So perhaps say no to something, or ask a friend or someone you trust for feedback from a third person perspective on something you did or said that didn't sit right with you afterwards. Maybe take some time to notice your emotional state and find the strength to take a brief moment of pause before you act. Whichever thing you do, afterwards, try and find 5 minutes to reflect on the experience and note down whatever comes to mind. Okay? Look, remember, we're not looking for miracles or life changing solutions with this. All we're looking for at this point is data, useful information that we can use to inform us about what's going on outside of the noise that we have in our heads. Because what we're talking about here, guys, is building new habits, right? New ways of thinking, new ways of interacting with our inner and outer worlds. And each step, no matter how small it is, that starts to build a new structure, brick by brick. And one day, I promise you, if you keep doing this, you're going to end up getting some feedback, and it's either going to come from inside your own head or from someone else that's going to highlight the shift, and it's going to show how much progress you're making, even if at the time you're struggling to see it for yourself. So I'd like to share a quick moment that happened to me recently. So somebody that I recently made friends with through him being the husband of one of my wife's friends, we were out having a drink one day, and he turned to me and he said, Matt, do you know what? I reckon I could introduce you to any one of my mates and they'd love you and you'd get on really well with them. And in that moment, I froze. And I just realized I say that a lot, don't I, that I froze, but then I guess I freeze a lot. But anyway, I froze. And I didn't quite know how to receive it or how to respond to it because compliments still sort of feel a bit alien to me. So I made some sort of joke to try and deflect it and avoid the discomfort. But then I thought about it, and a little while later, I saw it for what it was. It was just a genuine compliment. So I thanked him sincerely. I'd even apologized for brushing it off and didn't, let him know that I didn't want to come across dismissive or whatever when he said it. But then I realized something. Just before he said that to me, I was being silly. I was being unfiltered. I was being myself. And for the first time since we met, I think he just met the real me. Unfiltered, unhidden, unapologetic for who I am. Finally. And sometimes that's all it takes. One small moment like this to reinforce the new behavior. Sometimes it takes a few. But trust me when I say, each of them, no matter how small, are nudging you back in the right direction. As Alan Watts said, be weird, be random, be who you are. You never know who would love the person you hide. So, before we wrap up, I want you to think about one small change you can make this week to align more closely with who you really are. Extra points if you take that action today, okay? No time like the present. So, to wrap up and finish, just keep in mind, folks, this is a journey, okay? And whilst I'm talking to you about this stuff, I'm by far the finished product myself. This is something that I still work on day to day, and it's probably something I'm still going to be working on for quite some time. I don't think we can take, 10, 20, 40, 50, whatever it is for you, years of masking and hiding and being something that we think people want us to be and expect an overnight fix. But just because it's taken years to get to this point doesn't mean it's going to take years to get out. So keep in mind, ADHD does challenge authenticity in lots of ways, but the challenges are only challenges as long as we allow ourselves to believe and to be. So things like people pleasing and emotional dysregulation might be two of the biggest or the most common, but even they are going to vary from time to time and from person to person. Don't forget, you're going to have some challenges that are a bit more unique to you that other ADHDers don't share. And that's okay too, because we're all different people. So don't judge yourself for the fact that you have challenges that others don't, because I bet if that's true, there are also things you do brilliantly that other people struggle with. Okay? I know it's harder for us to see those things, but I know that it's true. And most importantly, remember that you can build self-awareness and change the script whenever you choose to. And each time you do, you're just creating more evidence in your mind that you're capable to do so. And the more evidence you have, the easier it is to repeat that action and to do that again. It's something that's going to build up step by step over time. So, what are you going to commit to this week? Tag me on socials or drop me an email or pop something on the website. And as always, if this helped you, subscribe, rate, share the episode with someone else who you think needs to hear it. Remember that your journey to authenticity is a marathon, not a sprint. So celebrate your wins, learn from the setbacks, and keep showing up. So until next time on Humanifesto, I'll leave you with this quote from Marianne Williamson's book, A Return to Love. It was also made famous by Rick Gonzalez as Timo Cruz in the Coach Carter movie, and it goes like this. Our deepest fear is not that we're inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we're powerful beyond measure. It's our light, not our darkness, that most frightens us. We ask ourselves, who am I to be brilliant, gorgeous, talented, fabulous? Actually, who are you not to be? And as we let our own light shine, we unconsciously give other people permission to do the same. Thanks for listening, everyone. Have a great week. See you on the next episode.